Rapture becomes her. Chapter 17. Emily leaped up from the study. They had been troubled. Pray God no one had been hurt. Is anyone hurt? She demanded. Her eyes flashed. How could this happen? Why the devil didn't I know about the landing? I should have been there. Unhappily, Walker said, You already left for the ball when Mr. Meek spied Jeb's signal. Everyone knew that the Broadfoot ball was tonight and that you'd be attending it. We were all aware that if Jeb chose tonight from Landon, that there wouldn't be any way that we could get word to you, or that you could leave the ball. He looked apologetic. We decided among ourselves that if Jeb did show up tonight, that we handle the transport of the goods ourselves. There wasn't any other choice. He's right, Barnabas said. You had to be at that ball tonight, and no excuse short of being on your deathbed would have been acceptable for your absence. Knowing that Barnaby was right didn't lessen her feelings of guilt, but in a calmer tone she said to Walker, Tell me. Walker cleared his throat. When Mr. Meek came to Mrs. Gilbert with word that Jeb was landing tonight, she was prepared to go ahead without you. Emily's lips tightened and he added hastily, This wasn't Jeb's first landing. You've a good crew and everyone knew their task. Morning would have been soon enough for you to hear that Jeb had returned. He hung his head and muttered. No one was expecting the Noel's gang to be lying in wait. Her face strained. Emily asked, Jeb, Mrs. Gilbert, are they hurt? There are some bloody heads and bruises, but no one is in danger of dying, Walker admitted. But come to the kitchen. Jeb is desperate to talk to you. Emily rushed past Walker, and with Barnaby and Walker on her heels, she ran to the kitchen. Though it was well after midnight, the kitchen was filled with people. Alice was busy wrapping a strip of clean linen around Jeb's temple as he sat on a stool next to the scrub oak table. Caleb, sporting an impressive black eye, stood beside Jeb. Mrs. Spaulding and Jane were concentrating on another one of Jeb's crew, slumped on the table at the opposite end. At their entrance, Jeb struggled to his feet. Lord Jocelyn, I didn't expect you here at this time of night. I escorted Miss Townsend home from the ball, Barnaby said, noting the bandage dangling down the side of Jeb's face, and the way Jeb gripped the table for balance, he said gently, Now sit down before you fall and tell us what has happened. Gratefully following Barnaby's orders, Jeb sat back down. Sending Emily a crooked smile, Jeb said, We'll all live, Missy, so don't you start scolding. Relief swept through her. Oh, Jeb, I was so fearful. You sure you're all right, and everybody else? We'll live, but no use pretending we're not bruised and bloody. Those bullies of Noel's are right-handed with those wooden clubs they carry, and they outnumber us. It's only by grace and good luck that none of us suffer a broken bone or worse. Johnny Fuller was knocked out and gave us a scarce until we had a chance to check his injuries. Mrs. Gilbert says he'll do fine. Faith took a nasty blow to her right arm, but nothing was broken. Mrs. Gilbert herself has a black eye to rival Caleb's, and Ford has a split lip. None of the others but have some aches and bruises. It could have been worse. Sinking down into a stool near Jeb, Emily asked, How did it happen? Been worried lately that they gotten wind of us, Jeb confessed. I'd heard a whisper or two, but since we're small and not much competition, I thought they'd leave us alone. He sighed. Near as we can figure, they must have been watching for my signal, or watching Meek's house, or mayhap the Crown, and so they knew of the landing. They jumped us after we unloaded everything, and had the horses packed, and were leaving the beach. It wasn't enough that they used their clubs on us with enthusiasm. Caleb broke in angrily. They stole the entire load of contraband and laughed as they left. Emily took in a trembling breath. At least you're all alive. Aye, that we are, Jeb said. But what are we going to do now? Nothing for the moment, Barnaby said, coming to stand beside Emily, one hand resting on her shoulder. His eyes on Jeb, he added, I'm afraid that after tonight we're going to have to find a more respectable way for you to make a living. Emily stiffened and would have risen, but Barnaby's hand kept her in her seat. Jeb surveyed him coolly. No disrespect, your lordship, but you'll not find many of us willing to take charity. Will honest employment be viewed as charity? Barnaby asked. Having a good idea what he was up to, Emily squirmed around in her seat and glared up at Barnaby. Title and fortune you may have, but you cannot employ everyone in the county, she said tightly. Barnaby smiled at her. I don't intend to employ everyone, just the main characters involved in your enterprise. They'll have to take care of the others. He looked up across at Jeb. I wouldn't have chosen now to bring this up, but I will place in the Jocelyn yet. It disappeared. Since I know little of sailing, I'll need a trustworthy captain and a small crew of his chosen. The wages would be fair and generous. Do you know of anyone who might be interested? Jeb nodded and rubbed his chin. Think I'll be able to find a few able seamen who might do. Johnny Fuller is my first mate. He'd be a good man to have, he grinned. And and I'm just the fellow to be your captain. I thought you might, Barnaby said, his dark eyes amused. Emily didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just that easily Barnaby had seduced Jeb away from her and onto his side. She tried to feel resentful about Jeb's defection, but she could not. Jeb wasn't a smuggler at heart. None of them were. Circumstances had forced them into the contraband trade, and she admitted that she wouldn't be sorry to see the end of it. No doubt, she thought wryly, Barnaby already had plans for Mrs. Gilbert and some of the other investors. Emily said to Jeb, There's nothing more can be done tonight. Walker can find you places to sleep here tonight, and have you gone before Geoffrey or his valet is likely to stumble over you. Jeb shook his head. That won't be necessary. We're going back to the Crown just in case. Will and his gang decides to inflict more damage tonight. I left Ford and Fuller and a few others with Mrs. Gilbert to keep an eye out for trouble. But Caleb and I need to be there if it comes to a fight. Do you think it will come to that? Emily asked wearily. No. Will and his boys got what they wanted and gave us a good trouncing in the bargain. I suspect they'll only go after the Crown if we don't heed their warning and continue to run contraband. But I don't want to risk being wrong again. Her initial shock and horror at tonight's events fading, Emily was puzzled. She could have heard all of this in the morning, so why was Jeb here at this hour? Almost as if he read her mind, Jeb said, I suppose you're wondering now what was so important that I had to see you tonight. As Emily's nod, he looked sly and added, Well, the answer is sitting right there at the other end of the table. Almost as one, Emily and Barnaby swung around to stare down the length of the long table. The fisherman, a stranger to her, was no longer slumped face down on the table, but was now propped up in a chair, his chin resting weakly on his chest. The bulky fisherman's garb hung loosely on his tall frame, and he was slim to the point of thinness. The bones of his wrists jutted out. Heavy black hair framed his face and fell down in a wave across his forehead, almost obscuring his eyes. His complexion was pale, but whether natural or from some illness, Emily couldn't tell. He looked, she decided, like a man who had narrowly escaped death. Barnaby stiffened, hardly able to believe his eyes. After a stunned moment, he rushed to the other end of the table and exclaimed, Loosen! Appalled by Luke's condition, he gently touched his half-brother's bone-thin shoulder. What the hell happened to him? Lucius stared slightly and with an effort, his head lifted. Door azure eyes met Barnaby's. I diced with death one time too often, but thanks to your friend Jeb here, he managed to get me out of France. He was darn near dead when I found him, Jeb said quietly, and that's what delayed us. Miss Emily had asked me to find out what I could about your brother when I was in Calais. As we arrived in port, I asked a few discreet questions but learned nothing. 2 days later, just as we were ready to sail, word came from a friend that she had an American who might be the fellow I was looking for. Jeb hesitated, then muttered, "He was an brother, and Marie feared he might die. When I first laid eyes on him, he wasn't dead yet, but near. We had no choice but to wait and see if he was going to live or not." He grinned at Luke. "The fellow decided to live, so we brought him back with us." Barnaby shook his head, and despite his concern over Luke's state, he muttered, "A whorehouse? Now why am I not surprised?" Luke flashed him a shadow of his old mocking grin, and murmured, "The ladies, you know they adore me." "But what happened?" Barnaby demanded. "How did you end up nearly dead in a whorehouse in Calais?" "It was not easy," Lucian replied. The azure eyes lifted to Barnaby's anxious face, and Luke said, "I should have listened to you and Lamb. It was a foolish task I set for myself and one bound to fail." Running a hand tightly over his face, he continued, "I nearly lost my life, and all I learned is that Mimi's family are all dead, and to be in France these days, especially for a foreigner, is unhealthy. Since last summer, Danton and Maret have dominated the Paris Commune and have taken over all police power, and they use it at will. In November, I was in Paris, and having finally accepted that none of the families survived, I was preparing to leave the city when someone reported that I had been asking pointed questions about the Gagner family. A vague smile crossed his face. The police came to call, and I'm afraid I was not polite. I ended up in prison." Mrs. Spaulding interrupted the narrative by placing a mug of steaming porridge, swimming with bits of broth and muttered in carrots, parsnips, and cabbage in front of Luke, and declared, "Eat. You can talk afterward. Right now you need this." Glaring at Jeb, she said, "And the same goes for you and Caleb. It's a bitter cold night out there, and you're not leaving my kitchen before getting something warm in your bellies." A bit more politely to Emily, she asked, "Would you or his lordship care for something? I have a nice pot of tea ready, and some cinnamon and raisin scones are about ready to come out of the oven any minute now. There's also plenty of that pottage if you like some." Emily and Barnaby meekly decided that a cup of tea and some scones would be appreciated. The others accepted the pottage and the chunks of bread and cheese Alice and Mrs. Spaulding put before them, while the others ate over the rim of her cup. Emily studied Barnaby's half-brother. She could see little resemblance to Barnaby beyond a certain look around the mouth and jaw and like Lamb. Luke had inherited the jostling blue eyes and aristocratic features. He would have easily passed for Matthew's brother. Though tall, even when he regained the weight he had obviously lost, Lucian would be a slim man, a rapier to Barnaby's broadsword. As if feeling her eyes on him, Luke looked up and stared back at her. Sorry about that, y'all. She flushed at the mild smile that lit up his face, and the speculative glint in that azure gaze as it traveled over her face and down to her bosom. Seeing Emily's blush and guessing the cause, Barnaby sighed. Luke liked women almost as much as they liked him, and even having just barely escaped death, his half-brother couldn't help flirting with the nearest attractive woman. Glancing at Lucian, Barnabas said softly, "Leave her alone, Luke. I'm marrying her on Tuesday." Astonished, Luke looked from Barnaby to Emily. A delighted grin flitted across his face. Mon Dieu! Now this is wonderful news. It is very good that Captain Jebb found me in time to attend the wedding. We? Yes, it is, Barnaby agreed. But you haven't told us how you ended up half dead in the whorehouse. Luke started to shrug, then grimaced and rubbed his right shoulder. After nearly 2 months in prison as a guest of the French police, I knew I had to escape or I'd die either of starvation, disease, or the guillotine. I was desperate, and when the opportunity arose to take part in a prison break, I took it. His lips twisted. Unfortunately, I was shot during the escape. My compatriots left me for dead, and they scattered in all directions, with no money, surrounded by strangers, and the French police looking for me. Reaching the coast and getting aboard a ship headed for England was my only option. Under the cover of darkness, I made my way on foot to the coast, stealing what I could as I traveled. He shot Barnaby a sardonic look. If I had any luck at all during that cursed trip, it was that upon my initial arrival in France while in Calais, I made the acquaintance of the same woman Jebb knew, Marie Dupree. I hoped if I could make it to her place that she would help me. A disgusted expression crossed his mobile features. I had been fond of the dawn wound having become infected. Right. But it did, and by the time I reached Calais and Marie's place, I was so weak and racked by fever, I could hardly stand, and if she hadn't taken me in, he smiled crookedly. If she turned her back on me, this story would have had a different ending. His voice thick with emotion, Barnaby said, I warned you that it was a down, sleeveless errand. Christ, you could have died, Luke. Seated beside Barnaby, Emily placed her hand over his as he lay on the table beside his cup of tea and squeezed gently, her heart aching for him. His hand turned and his fingers tightened on hers, and in that odd moment all doubts about her common marriage vanished. Why, we belong together, she admitted, staggered by the insight. Her gaze dropped to their hands, just as our hands were linked in some indefinable way, she thought. Dazzled, so are our very lives inalterably melded together. Together they were stronger, more complete, and in that instant she realized why she was in love with him, stunned by the discovery. Her thoughts in the world, her fingers clenched even tighter around Barnaby's. His fingers gripping Emily's as if he never let them go. When Lucian remained silent, Barnaby said, Go on, finish it. Toying with a small chunk of bread, Lucian said wearily, When I first arrived in France, I stayed a few days in Calais, and one night I visited Marie's establishment. There was some trouble in her place that night. His face went hard, and he said flatly, I settled the problem much to Marie's relief and gratitude. She swore she was in my debt, and that if I ever needed a favor to call upon her, he shrugged. So when I showed up half dead on her doorstep months later, she repaid the favor. Barnaby glanced at Jebb. It seems that I am deeper in your debt than I realized. Thank you for saving his life and bringing my brother safely home. Jebb waved a dismissive hand. Miss Emily is the one you should thank. If she hadn't mentioned him to me, we'd have sailed from Calais with nary a thought of looking for Mr. Lucen. His eyes on Emily, Luke said, It seems soon to be sweet sister that I am in your debt. You saved my life, it is yours to command. And I command you for my brother's sake to regain your health, and try not to cause him further anxiety, Emily said with a glimmer of a smile in her fine eyes. Once you know him better, Barnaby said dryly, you will discover that the latter is beyond him. He is not called Lucifer for nothing. Paid him no heed, Luke replied airily. My petite brother fusses like a hen with one chick, he grinned. It is good that his attention will now be shared between us. Keeping him distracted is a burden I will gladly share with you. With Lucian's tale told, the group spoke up. Jeb and Caleb leaving to return to the village. Shortly after that, having said a private good night to Emily, Barnaby bundled Lucian into the waiting jostling coach, sinking back against the luxurious padded dark blue cushions as the big coach lurched into motion and drove away by the small candles burning in the four glass lanterns hung on each side of the coach doors. He regarded Barnaby seated across from him. Smiling faintly, he asked, "Your lordship, how the bloody hell did that happen?" As the coach rumbled through the night, Barnaby gave an expurgated version of the events that had occurred during the 7 months since they had last seen each other. A viscount, Lucian exclaimed when Barnaby was through. And Lamb here with you. He shot him a teasing look from between thick feminine lashes. With your penchant for acting like a bloody hen, I'm surprised you let Barnaby remain at home and didn't drag her to England with you. Barnaby hunched his shoulder. I didn't know what I was walking into here, and she was adamantly opposed to leaving Green Hill. It seemed wisest to leave her behind for the time being. Naming Barnaby and Bethany's uncle, Lucian said, "Frontier with her?" Barnaby nodded, satisfied was all was well with his young half-sister, and aware that there was some intriguing gaps in Barnaby's narrative. Luke said, "Now tell me how it is that the lovely fair-haired Amazon you plan to marry is at home with a gang of smugglers." Laughing, Barnaby said, "You and Lamb." He's called her my Amazon from the moment he first laid eyes on her. Lamb and I often agreed about women, Lucian peered, but I noticed you're not telling me about the smugglers. Knowing Lucian wouldn't give up until he had the whole story, reluctantly Barnaby related the main points. Lucian nodded several times, and when Barnaby finished speaking, he grinned at him. "You know I am liking this Amazon of yours more and more. I predict she will save you from becoming a stuffy old man. My Cornelia," Lucian chuckled. "If she were 50 years younger, she's still my heart." "She will anyway," Barnaby said, smiling. "So tell me more of our cousins, Matthew, Thomas, and Simon, and the possibility," Lucian's eyes narrowed, "that one of them was trying to kill my favorite brother." "I'm your only brother," Barnaby reminded him gently. "Oui, that is true," Lucian said, "which is why you are my favorite and why I would prefer not to lose you." The remainder of the drive to Windmere was spent considering the reasons and identity of the person behind the attacks on Barnaby. "I think I liked it better," Lucian said as the coach pulled to a stop at the front of the mansion. When Matthew and Thomas were at your house where you could watch them, who knows what they are up to at this monk's abbey?" "Not to worry," Barnaby said as he reached for the handle of the coach door. "They'll be arriving back here on Monday for the wedding on Tuesday. In the meantime, you can meet Simon and take his measure." In the darkness, Lucian wasn't treated to the full magnificence of the house, but stepping inside the soaring two-story foyer and the rich furnishings, his eyes widened. "Mon Dieu, I begin to see why our cousin might very well wish you dead." The tall young footman, William Weldon, was there to greet them, and not as well trained as his butler. Weldon couldn't hide his flash of astonishment that his lordship had returned home, with a scruffy fisherman by his side, and one whose features bore the Jocelyn stamp. Barnaby grinned, liking the honest reaction rather than Peckham's expressionless features. Upon reaching his rooms, Barnaby showed Lucian into the handsomely appointed sitting room adjoining his bedroom and rang for Lamb. He offered Lucian some liquor from the dazzling array of Baccarat crystal decanters that lined a mahogany sideboard on the far side of the room. Lucian declined the offer, but sprawled gracefully on one of the sofas. "Nothing for me. I need a clear head," Lucian murmured, to endure a fierce scolding from Lamb. Lamb entered the bedroom a moment later. At first he didn't notice Lucian on the sofa. Smiling, he teased Barnaby. "I see your Amazon did not keep you long." which was probably just as well, Barnaby said wryly, thinking of those passionate moments in her arms and how close he had been to seducing Emily tonight. He waved a hand in Lucian's direction and added, I brought home a guest. You'll have to find him suitable rooms. Lamb glanced at the bag of bones lolling on the sofa and froze. There was a second that Barnaby glimpsed the naked love, and relief that spread across Lamb's face before it was instantly masked. Betraying little emotion, Lamb stared at Lucy and said calmly, I've seen you looking better. Indeed, I confess there are times that I have felt better, Lucy replied just as calmly. Barnaby had never understood the relationship between these two. He never doubted that they loved each other, but too often they were at daggers drawn. He could not decide for the life of him if it was because they were too much alike or because of an innate competitiveness. His mouth twisted when he was actually caught in the middle of it. Ignoring the pale dun, he splashed some Hawk in the glass. He took a swallow of the pale liquid and realizing that conversation was up to him. He related the high points of Lucian's arrival. When Barnaby finished speaking, Lamb corked a brow and like Barnaby before him, he said, Warehouse? Now why doesn't that surprise me? Unlike his reaction when Barnaby had made the same observation, Luke bristled and replied curtly, You know me, any port in a storm. Barnaby stalled the sharp retort he sensed hovering on Lamb's tongue by saying hastily, The point is, he is home and safe. He's not fully recovered yet, and the best place for him right now is bed. Lamb studied Lucy's face and not liking his color or the dull sheen in his eyes, didn't argue. On his way out of the room, he said over his shoulder, I'll see to it immediately. Lamb was as good as his word, and within 30 minutes Lucy was installed in a superb suit of rooms just down the hall from Barnaby's. Lamb had assigned an eager young footman, Bertram Hinton, to act as Lucy's manservant until other arrangements could be made. With Lucy now wearing one of the nightshirts Barnaby routinely ignored, tucked into bed before he left the room, Lamb looked at him and shook his head. You do have the devil's own luck, you know, if you arrive only hours later. Lamb's heart clenched at how close they had come to losing him. Struggling against the tide of emotion that flooded him, he said softly, Welcome home, Bantling. We were worried about you. Barnaby looked up from the contemplation of his empty glass of hock when Lamb entered the room. Is he all settled? He asked as Lamb took the glass from him and refilled it. For now, Lamb replied, turning back with the full glass and handed it to Barnaby. He's in the suit 2 doors down. I have assigned Hinton to act as his valet for now. For 7 minutes they mulled over Lucian's return, as well as the attack by the Noel's gang tonight. It was only luck that Emily wasn't with Jeb tonight, Barnaby said, then added thoughtfully. I have to do something about Noel's and his gang soon. But not before the wedding, Lamb warned. You are going to stand hale and hearty before the cross my and marry the Amazon Tuesday morning if I have to shackle you to the bed until then. Barnaby smiled. That won't be necessary. Once the wedding is behind us, will be soon enough to tackle the Noel's problem. Setting down the half-empty glass of hock, he asked, All well here? Lamb rubbed his jaw. There's something smoky about that butler of yours, but I can't put my finger on it. What makes you say that? Barnaby asked. Peckham seems competent enough. That may be, but I don't like him. Ah, well then, that explains everything. Lamb shot him a look. Blast it. This is no light matter. I tell you, he was up to something up tonight. But damn, if I can figure out what it was. He paused and said slowly, Most of the staff had gone to bed by the time I started paying attention to Peckham. All evening he appeared to be waiting for something or looking for something. Why do you say that? Because, Lamb said impatiently. He kept darting in and out of the kitchen like a damn rabbit from a hole, and I finally got curious about what he was up to and followed him. When he headed to the cellar, I thought that he was helping himself to a nip of brandy or wine now and then, and sure enough, he headed right to the wine cellar. Barnabas shrugged. I don't begrudge the man some wine. Lord knows there's enough down there. Problem is, Lamb said, this time he was in the wine cellar a very long time. I got tired of waiting for him to return and decided to see what was taking him so long. His voice heavy with import, he said, Barnaby, I know it's a big place more than like a cabin filled with rows of racks and barrels in a room, but I checked the area thoroughly and the cellar was empty. There was no sign of him. Interested now, Barnaby sat forward in his chair. Secret doorway? Someone mentioned something about tunnels or passageways under the older parts of the house. Perhaps he's found one of the entrances. That's my guess. I looked for it, but I couldn't find anything. That might be a hidden spring or a handle. What about when he came back? Did you ask him about it then? The thing is, Lamb said heavily, he hasn't come back. He disappeared. Barnaby stared at him. You mean like forever? I don't know. I just don't know. He went into the wine cellar and I haven't seen him since. A huge yawn overtook Barnaby. Shaking his head, he said, since it appears he disappeared on his own, I'm not about to wake the household and institute a search for him. The morning will be soon enough. When Lamb entered Barnaby's room that Saturday morning, the first words out of his mouth were Peckham's back. Grimly he added, Fellow was in the kitchen this morning as bright and cheery as a canary, acting as if nothing happened, and for all I know nothing did. But he did disappear. He went somewhere. Barnaby reminded him as he left his bed, sat and threw on the robe Lamb held out for him. Barnaby walked into the dressing room and after completing his morning ablutions, as he dried his hands on a towel made of fine Russian toweling, he said, We'll have to examine that wine cellar. If there's a secret doors, I want to know where they are and where they lead. It had become Barnaby's routine, after breakfast and a meeting with Tilden, his house steward, who also acted as his secretary and his bailiff, to ride over to the Birches. A few weeks ago, Jameson, his head stableman, had shown him a shortcut between Winmere and the Birches, and Barnaby no longer bothered taking the public road when he went to call upon Emily and Cornelia. With Lucian's arrival, he was later than usual getting away this morning, but finally just before noon, he was able to head for the stables and his horse, the spirited black stallion aptly named Satan. The day was gray and drizzly as a few dark-bottomed clouds, left over from last night's storm, scuttered across the sky, but eager to see Emily. Barnaby wasn't about to allow a light shower to stop him. His thoughts were turned inward as Satan, eager to run, galloped over the by now familiar route to the Birches. Barnaby reflected on his visit with Lucian this morning. Lucian looked better this morning, although he knew it would be weeks, perhaps months, before his half brother was fully recovered, not only from his time in prison, but the wound infection that had nearly killed him. Peckham's odd activities last night nagged at the back of his mind. Where had the butler disappeared to and why? And then there was the Noel's game. Deep in thought, by the time he crossed into the lands owned by Emily's cousin, Barnaby wasn't paying attention to the rolling countryside. One second he was riding along, lost in his thoughts, and the next Satan screamed and went down. Barnaby catapulted over the horse's head, slammed into the ground. He'd hit hard, his head taking the brunt of the fall. Dazed and dizzy, he lay there, the breath knocked from his body. His vision swam when he raised his head to look round. Blurry-eyed, he saw Satan struggle to his feet and limp to the side of the trail. The world went black, but a second later, he was back lying on the road, staring up at the gray sky. Aware he was fading in and out of consciousness, he tried to concentrate, tried to make sense of what had happened to him. The bleating of sheep in the distance filtered through his foggy brain and groaning. He lifted his head once more. Fighting the dizziness, he looked around, but saw nothing beyond the stallion, his head hanging low, standing nearby. Noticing a taut, thin cord stretched across the lane behind Satan, he frowned. He stared stupidly at the cord, his befuddled thoughts trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Distracted and barely conscious, he didn't hear the rustling in the bushes next to the ground. It was unaware of the shadowy figure slipping onto the pathway. A voice familiar and not yet familiar floated in the air somewhere above him. "Damn you! Why don't you want you die?" snarled the voice. "You should have broken your bloody neck, and since you didn't, isn't it a good thing I stayed to make Satan this time?" Barnaby's gaze drank upward, just as excruciating pain exploded in his head. And this time, the blackness stayed.